Do you ever feel a little self-conscious when speaking English? Do you ever feel like you're often misunderstood even though you are trying to express yourself clearly? Well, if so, it could be related to your accent. And you are in the right place because today we are going to go through 35 words that, if pronounced correctly, should help the rest of your English pronunciation. If you can get all 35 of these perfect, these are some of the most difficult words to pronounce in the English language, so you should have no problem with others. Two things to note before we start. The first is that I would never encourage anyone to try and sound native, because if you do that, you're setting yourself up to be disappointed. There is absolutely nothing wrong with sounding like you come from the country that you come from. You don't need to sound like a British person or an American person. You can sound like you, but just make sure you are understood. We live in a world that is constantly changing, and so many people these days are dual nationality or live in between two countries or bilingual or trilingual. So wanting to sound native is a good goal, but it's not something you should strive towards. It's not something you need to pressure yourself about. What is important, though, is that you are understood when you are talking. And if you want more tips on how to be understood, how to make yourself clearer, how to work on your intonation, your speed at which you talk, the pronunciation of the individual words to be understood by a wider audience, I highly recommend my public speaking videos. I will link them in the comments section because in there I go through all of these factors that can help you be understood. The second thing is that, in case you haven't noticed, I'm a British English native speaker. So if you are not interested in British pronunciation, this is not the video for you. I do sometimes go through the difference between the American spelling versus the British spelling, or American pronunciation versus British, but I am a British native speaker, and so these will all be the British pronunciations of things. Now to this video. I have taken these words from a list of the 50 most difficult words to pronounce in the English language. I'm not sure what these words are judged on, so I'm not sure if it's based on words that natives mispronounce or just non-natives mispronounce, or if it's due to the amount of syllables or the type of vowels, the type of consonants. I'm not sure, but these are considered some of the hardest to pronounce but most common words in the English language. I have gone through and chosen ones that I think you might actually come across. Any that are irrelevant, I will not go over, but I will leave the link below to the article that I'm using so that you can have a look for yourself and go through with me all of the pronunciations of these words. The idea is, if you can pronounce these all correctly, then you should have a good handle on the English language as a whole. And any that you struggle to pronounce, keep practicing. Just because I've told you that this is how you have to pronounce it, doesn't mean you should feel guilty or bad or worse than anyone else after this video. It just means you need to keep practicing. The words you struggle with, write them down and practice every day until the pronunciation is as you want it to sound. You can follow along, pause the video after each word, copy the way I pronounce them. I also really recommend grabbing a notebook and a pen to make any notes, because a really handy technique when doing pronunciation is finding sounds in your own language and writing them next to the English spelling so it reminds you how you can pronounce it with an alphabet or with sounds that you are used to. So without much further introduction, and before my voice runs out, grab a pen, a coffee, water, your pet cat, whatever you need to feel comfortable, and let's get started. Accede. Accede. Now, to accede is to give your consent or approval to someone else's actions. It can also mean that you agree with the opinions of a group. It's a very formal, very advanced way of saying to agree with. So an example sentence: after much negotiation, the parties were able to accede to a compromise, finding common ground that satisfied both sides. And the emphasis is on the second syllable, the seed, exceed. Alias, alias. Some people like to say alias, that's not correct. Alias, alias. Almost like you're about to say alien and then you change your mind last minute. Alias. And an alias is like a fake name or identity. It doesn't necessarily mean fake, it's just an identity or name that you use because you don't want to give your name. So for example, the English cat would be an alias for me as it's not my full name. If you play games online and you use a nickname or a gamer tag, that would be an alias that you go by when you are playing a game. Alias. Now I have to admit this next one I had to practice quite a few times. Anemone, anemone. Anem o ni, anemone. This is in the movie Finding Nemo, if you've ever seen that movie, and if you've ever watched it in English, you'll remember this from there. It's a running joke throughout the entire film. It's a type of animal that lives on the bottom of the sea. It attaches itself to rocks, and it doesn't really move. It just stays in one place. And the reason this is considered one of the hardest to pronounce words in the English language is because it sounds like enemy. So lots of people get confused and say an enemy, an enemy. Anemone, anemone. Antarctic, Antarctic. Now the stress here is on the middle syllable, arc, arc. Antarctic. Said in an example sentence, you might say something like, I really want to visit the Antarctic. The stress is on the middle syllable. And the Antarctic is the South Pole. It's that country right at the bottom of the earth that has penguins and polar bears and not a lot else. We should also be protecting it. Brewery, brewery. Now this is very difficult for me personally to pronounce. I struggle with the R sound. Brewery, brewery. The emphasis is on the first syllable. Brewery, brewery. And a brewery is where beer is created. So if you are a big craft beer fan or you like drinking particular beers, flavored beers, I know IPA is very popular now. I personally don't like beer, but if you do, this is where they are created. A brewery, brewery. Cavalry. Cavalry. This isn't used so often in just daily conversation, but cavalry refers to the soldiers that used to ride by horse, the ones that were on horseback. I've not really heard anybody use this word outside of military, outside of talking about the army or history, but it is one that's nice for you to practice because a lot of people get this wrong. So trying to say cavalry, cavalry is a good way to practice those words, those syllables, those letters. Cavalry. Choir, choir. Now in theory, this is a very easy one to pronounce, but a lot of people get confused by the CH sound. But unfortunately, to really throw you off, it creates a W sound. Choir, choir. And a choir is a group of singers. Traditionally, they would sing religious songs, but nowadays a choir is any group of people that gets together to sing. That's their hobby, singing. They are a choir, and typically without backing music. So it's not like a band where you have lots of different instruments. It's just the singers and their voices. During festive period in the UK, you will find choirs in every supermarket, outside of every shopping mall, singing for the public to listen to. Colonel, colonel, colonel. Now this is a very strange spelling for the way it's pronounced, but it's because it comes from the French word, and colonel means a military officer, someone high up in the military. If you've ever played Cluedo, you have Colonel Mustard in Cluedo. Again, not used so often in daily spoken English, but it's one that's good to know the pronunciation, so if you ever come across it, you don't get confused. Colonel. Comfortable, comfortable. Now, the reason this is considered one of the hardest is because a lot of people pronounce the last part as table, comfortable, but it's a softer end. The emphasis is on the first sound, comfortable, comfortable, comfortable. And it just means you feel good, you're relaxed, you feel like you're in a place where you can relax and rest. I bought a new bed on the weekend and now I feel so comfortable, I sleep perfectly at night. Defibrillator, defibrillator. Technically a medical word, medical terminology, but the reason I've included this one is because most offices, co-working spaces, shopping malls, shopping centers have a defibrillator just in case anything happens. Defibrillator, defibrillator. And it's that device, you may have seen it in TV shows about doctors, nurses, where they take the two paddles and they shock the patient and their heart starts beating again. This is a defibrillator. Deteriorate, deteriorate. This is a fantastic word to say and to use. Now, to deteriorate means something gets worse. The condition decreases. So things are getting bad. My ability to work is deteriorating. Your quality of work is deteriorating. Be careful that you look after yourself on the weekends and take lots of rest, or your mental health could deteriorate, deteriorate. You can use this to describe any situation getting worse. Decreasing, deteriorate, deteriorate. Draft. Now, this is not spelt how it's pronounced. I will admit that. This is a very strange one. Draft. And it is a type of alcohol. Again, if you like beer, you might have seen this word, draft beer. It's the ones when you go to a restaurant or a pub or a bar, instead of buying in a bottle or a can, it comes from the tap. And usually the bartender has to pour it for you. This is a draft beer. Not to be confused with this word, which is drought, drought. And a drought is when there's no water and it's very, very dry outside. So this pronunciation is draft. I would like a draft beer. Epitome, epitome. Again, fantastic word to use in the workplace or even in your casual conversations if you want to. The epitome is like the perfect example or the perfect situation, fantastic quality. It can't get better than this. Instead of saying something is perfect, you can say it is the epitome of XYZ. Epitome, epitome. Espresso, espresso. Now, whilst this is a pretty easy word to say, lots of people say espresso, which of course is not the case. There is no X in there. Espresso, espresso. It's almost like there's a double S in the beginning and the end. Espresso, espresso. And it's a very strong Italian coffee that typically doesn't come with milk, or it can come with milk, but it's in a very, very small glass. Explicit, explicit. This is a nice word to say, explicit. And the emphasis is on the second syllable, explicit, explicit. When you are explicit about something or something is explicit, it's very clear, it's very detailed, it's very obvious. If a film or book is ever described as explicit, it usually means it goes into a lot of detail about crimes or romances or areas that usually we would keep private. But it can also mean just very, very strict and specific rules or regulations for something like this example. The professor provided explicit instructions for the experiment, leaving no room for confusion among students, meaning he was very, very clear in what they should and shouldn't do. Exponentially. Exponentially, exponentially. There's the TI becomes an SH sound, exponentially. And this is an adverb meaning quickly, rapidly, very, very fast paced. So you often hear people talking about the stock market as being exponential, meaning something happens very quickly. Or his career grew exponentially, grew very quickly. The popularity of new social media platform grew exponentially within a few months, attracting millions of users around the globe, meaning more than they could imagine. It grew quicker, faster than they could imagine. And you can use this to describe any situation in your work, something happening quicker or faster than you expected. February. February. Now, this one is actually a tricky one because, as you can hear, I am not pronouncing the R. February. But a lot of people do. February. That's very difficult for me personally to say. February. February. But I pronounce it as though it's February. February. Neither of these is wrong or right. They are just different pronunciations. The British like to add U, like Tuesday. Tuesday. It should be Tuesday, but we add a Y-O-U sound where the U is, and I'm doing the same with February. So whichever one is easier for you, with the R, without the R, that's up to you to decide. Isthmus. Isthmus. Now, because of the TH sound here, the TH spelling, sorry, a lot of people feel they need to pronounce the TH. But in this case, it's not necessary. And an isthmus is a geographical feature. It's a narrow piece of land located between two different seas. It's very, very rare, but for example, there's an isthmus of East Falkland, which is a piece of land between two different seas. And there are many in the world. There's some in Brazil, Argentina, Canada, Mexico, United States, Venezuela, Central America, Chile. So it's not often that you will come across these, but you may come across an isthmus. No, no. This is very easy to pronounce as it's just like its counterpart N-O. But a lot of people want to pronounce the K. They want to say kno, kno, I know this. But it's not. It's a silent K. I know this. I know you are upset. What can I do to help? No. Library. Library. Now, I was surprised to see this in here, if I'm honest, but maybe it's because of the double R. Some people say library, library, and it's not. You need to say library, library. Quite difficult, I know. Library, library. And of course, in case you don't know, a library is where you can take out books, hire books for the week. There's lots of published materials and free materials there for the public to use. I don't think they're so popular anymore, but they definitely were when I was a child, and I'm sure when you were a child. Mauve. Mauve. Now, mauve is a shade of purple. So unless you work in interior design or you're a graphic designer or you work a lot with color, you might not need to know all the different shades. And I know in a lot of languages they just say light purple, light blue, dark blue. But in English we have words for these in-between colors. So like turquoise is green and blue. Mauve is like a purple and a reddy color. Mischievous, mischievous. Again, a very nice adjective that you can use in any conversation, professional, casual. Mischievous, mischievous. And it means to cause trouble, likes causing trouble. It doesn't necessarily mean very bad or evil. It's usually playful. There's no anger, there's no hate behind it. So, for example, children are often described as mischievous because they're not doing things on purpose. They're just having fun. They like to try things out, try new things. So if someone's causing trouble in the workplace, maybe playing a trick on you or a colleague, or one of your friends likes to play pranks or tricks on you, you could describe them as mischievous, and it's not an offensive word. It's like a cute, playful word. Our next word is often. Often. Now, I personally pronounce this often, and I once had a comment on one of my videos that I should never pronounce it with a T. Now, as a native English speaker that has spoken English my entire life and lived in England for the majority of my life, I can tell you that pronouncing often with the T sound is perfectly fine. There is nothing wrong with saying often. However, I do notice when I say often to students, sometimes they get confused or don't know what I've asked because it's more common to hear it without the T, often. Well, why are there two pronunciations and which one is correct? This is a fantastic question. This actually comes down to class, social class. And I don't really want to go into class because I don't want anyone thinking I am trying to say they are wrong or beneath anyone else. And I personally don't like the idea of social class. But typically, the higher classes will use the T sound often. Now, that's not to say one is correct and one is incorrect, not at all. And that's not to say you must use one and not the other, not at all. Use whichever you feel comfortable with, often or often. I like to go to the gym often. I often go to the gym. Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia. Now, this is a term that's used in English literature to describe a word that refers to a sound. So it's spelt like it sounds. So buzz. Buzz is spelt because that's the sound it makes. Buzz. Or roar, when a lion roars, that's onomatopoeia. You're spelling out a sound. So really, you wouldn't use this in your everyday conversation, but if you are interested in poems or you're interested in English literature, you read a lot, you might notice this onomatopoeia. And the only reason I can pronounce it so well is because children in England learn about onomatopoeia from a very, very young age. So pronunciation is onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia. Phlegmatic. Phlegmatic. Emphasis on the second syllable. Now, whilst this sounds like it should be an illness, a disease related to phlegm, it isn't. Phlegmatic means you're easygoing, you're calm, you don't show too much emotion. In challenging or stressful situations, you don't get worked up or anxious or scared. It's not very common. It would be more common to say easygoing or relaxed. But, as an example, Sarah remained phlegmatic, addressing each issue with a cool and collected demeanor despite facing numerous setbacks in the project. So Sarah was calm and cool and collected. Penguin. Penguin. Now, this seems like a bit of a funny one to be in this list, considering how complicated our previous words have been. Penguin is not a complicated word, but I think the reason it's in here is because the U sound puts people off. It turns into a W. Penguin. Penguin. And I'm sure you all know what a penguin is. It's a black and white bird. And it can't fly, interestingly. Cannot fly. Phenomenon. 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 That's an interesting phenomenon. A phenomenon is an event that you can watch, you can see unfolding, see happening that maybe doesn't happen too often. It's considered noteworthy or exceptional. Does not happen often. So, for example, the sudden increase in temperature during winter is an unusual phenomenon that has left scientists intrigued and studying its causes. Now, of course, we know that's global warming. It's not really that much of a phenomenon. But let's say, for example, you are watching a solar eclipse where the moon passes in front of the sun. That would be a phenomenon. And the reason people always pronounce this incorrectly, they mix up the M and the N, so they might say phenomenon when it's phenomenon, phenomenon, phenomenon. Puerile, puerile. Now this is a synonym for childish or immature, foolish. Puerile. The comedian's puerile jokes may entertain some, but they often leave a more mature audience seeking humor with substance. Now, this is just a complicated way, a more advanced way of saying that the comedian makes very childish jokes. They're not that funny. Or maybe they're only funny for a particular audience, but not this audience. Again, you could use this at work if someone's being very childish or silly or makes a stupid mistake. That was a puerile mistake. You're being very puerile. Of course, it's rude, so maybe don't use it in the workplace, but use it in situations that require you to let someone know that they are being childish. Rural. Rural. This can be very difficult for people whose languages don't have the R sound. Rural. Rural. And rural just means that you live or it is located in the countryside. So I live in a rural area. I live in the countryside. There's not many shops, businesses where I live. My parents moved to a rural village. Rural, rural. Scissors, scissors. A lot of people like to use the C and say skizzers or skissers. This is scissors. The double S becomes a Z sound and the C is silent. Scissors. And of course, you know, scissors are used to cut paper or fabric or anything else you want to cut in half. Sixth. Sixth. Not only have you got the TH sound, but there's an S sound in there as well. It's like sixth, sixth, sixth. It's quite long. I came in sixth place. Sixth place. Your tongue needs to come out of your mouth when you make this sound. Sixth, sixth, sixth. Now, specific, you can use this all the time. I use it in a lot of my videos. You've probably heard me use the word specific before. It just means particular or something that is clearly defined, something that is clearly located, clearly mentioned, clearly talked about. And it's specific, 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 specific. We've only got two more, so hang on in there. Successful, successful. Now, I was quite surprised to see this on the list because I haven't ever heard anyone say this incorrectly. But I guess because of the double C, the double S, and the F sound, it makes it quite a mouthful. You have to change the way your mouth is shaped multiple times to get this word out. Successful, successful, successful. And I don't need to tell you what this word means because you know. If you are able to pronounce everything in this video correctly, you will be more successful with your English pronunciation. It's to achieve something, to be accomplished. And my last one today, temperature, temperature, temperature. Now, when people say this fast, they ignore the second E and they just say temperature, temperature, temperature. Let me take your temperature. What is the temperature today? And it is the degree, the measurement of heat. If you want to say it more naturally, more like a native, you can just say temperature, temperature, temperature. What is the temperature? Now, as I mentioned, some of those words on the list I haven't included because they are absolutely not used, like translucent, quick to get angry, translucent. I've never used that word in my entire life. Quixotic, someone whose ideas are unrealistic or impractical. Again, not used commonly, but I will link this article below if you want to pick up these words, learn these words. That's entirely up to you. I hope some of these pronunciations have helped you. Again, it's not going to help you with every word in the English language, but if you can practice these ones, it will help you when you come across other sounds that are very similar. Let me know down below if there are any words that you find really difficult to pronounce, and maybe I can create a video on your suggestions of hard words to pronounce. Go back and rewatch any pronunciations that you found difficult, and I will see you next time. Have a fantastic week. Goodbye.